This is probably going to be a bit of a ramble, even more so than my normal things, which are already, I think, a little bit rambly. I've got my coffee. I want to talk about story. This has come up, it comes up all the time. Came up most recently when I looked at Grimwild, and that game leans very much into the story game type subgenre of role-playing game. In looking at Grimwild and talking about my preferences and what I like and what I don't like so much, there were some great comments from folks, and a lot of them revolved around this concept of story, that if the game is telling you, hey, shoot for the cool story, aim for the cool story, what's wrong with that? Aren't we doing that already? When you're making your choices as a player character, aren't you looking at what would make a cooler story? The answer for me is no, I'm not. The last thing that I am thinking about when I'm playing a game is what makes for the cooler story. Now, I'm not someone who would say, I just do what my character would do. You have a whole spectrum of stuff that your player character can do. So when you're choosing, simple rules. Don't be a jerk. Don't be a loner when you're playing a team game, yada, 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 right? Respect the GM, respect your other players, respect yourself, all of that. But at no point am I thinking about what makes the cooler story. But to delve into this a little bit more, I think we need to break down this concept of story. That's one of the difficulties when talking about this, because really there are two types of stories. No, that's not right. What there is there's a story, and there are a couple of ways that stories are generated. One is when they are pre-plotted, like when you're watching media, reading a book, an author, a creator, they have generated a pre-plotted story, and you're following that story along, plot point to plot point to plot point, until you get to some kind of climax and conclusion, and the story ends. There's another type of story, which is a story that is generated. Imagine a sporting event that you witness in person. It's got highs, it's got lows, it'll have stuttering stops, it'll have momentum changes, it'll have a lot going on. Then when you read, at least that's how we used to, read the article the next day talking about that sporting event, the author of that article will create one or more stories from the events of that sporting event. The sporting event itself is messy. You're talking about football, 4 and outs, dropped passes, in baseball, strikeouts, and just foul balls, and all these things. A lot of that stuff will just get glossed over by the story that's written afterwards, unless they fitted itself into the story. If the story is about how masterful a pitcher was in a baseball game, then it might be natural that foul balls, when he's fighting with a particular batter trying to get him out, or the strikes, will be an important aspect. In another type of story written about a different game, or even maybe that same game, then that might not be talked about at all. Instead, we'll focus on heroics in the outfield. Managerial decisions might come out. The fact is that within the sporting game itself, as it's being played, there's no story. People are doing the things they're trying to do to succeed. You're a running back, you're handing off the ball, and you're not thinking what makes the greatest story. You're thinking about, well, I want to get the most amount of yards I can on this play. What can I do that's best for me in this particular position that I'm in? And then we'll see what happens. And that gets constructed later into a story. Whereas if you're an author and you're writing a story about a player playing football, a running back, let's say, then to you might be looking at it. It's like, well, what's the big story about this particular play? Is this particular play important, or is it not important? Should I not discuss it at all? What's going on? When I'm playing a role-playing game, I like to think of it as we're playing through the history part, which is where it's just a mess. You're getting dispatches day to day about what's going on. People are doing stuff. Yeah, we're trying to reach objectives, or we're trying to prevent enemies from getting objectives. And we're doing this, we're doing that. But we're doing what we feel like is best for us, for the team, for ourselves, for our characters in that moment. I'm not looking down the line to, well, what makes the best story would be that if we have a setback here and then we do better tomorrow, or we do this and do that. That's not what I'm interested in. And it's fine if you aren't interested in it. Grimwild, I think, takes great pains to really say to it, look at it like it's a TV show. I mean, they literally say, look at it like it's a TV show. But that's just not the way I like to play the game. No shade if you do. That's great. That's not the way I do it. What I like to think about is, well, just what makes the most sense for us to do in the moment? Do I want to lean towards stuff that's more fun versus stuff that's not fun? Sure. If we're in a situation like, hey, we have 2 plans. One, we can storm the fortress, or 2, we can spend a couple weeks going through the bad guys' accounting, looking for malpractice. Yeah, I'm probably going to choose storming the fortress, but I'm not playing an accounting game. I'm playing a storm the fortress kind of game. So sure, but I'm not doing it because of some particular story beat or some kind of story element down the line. So when games to me come and say, hey, do what's best for the cool story, that's almost the antithesis of how I want to play. I just don't love those kinds of games where I'm trying to play a pre-plotted out story, even if I'm the one doing the pre-plotting. I want to play with, we're going to do what's in the moment. A good example of this is just the game that I'm in now. I'm in a player in a game, and we spend a lot of time trying to do a lot of things. And if you tried to look at it as a one cogent, coherent story right now, it would be really hard to find something. We're kind of all over the place. Some parts of it were like that, the dog that gets, squirrel, and then, we got to go run after that a little bit. No, let's come back and do this. At no point are any of us going, what would make the coolest story? So from that standpoint, if you look at it as if you were in the audience, if you were in the TV audience watching, if we were streaming the thing or watching it, it would probably be terrible. Terrible viewing. I have no doubt that it would be really boring as a live player, just uninteresting or frustrating as an audience member. But there's no audience. We are our own audience in the game, but we don't have to worry about that. And we're not trying to worry about that. We're all having a great time. We're enjoying playing the game. And later on, some point later in this campaign, if someone were to put together, they'll be able to come up with a bunch of stories out of that, out of this muck of history that we're playing. We can construct stories, but that to me is at the end. I'm happy in the mess. I don't want to be artificially funneled, and I don't want some other player to do it for me. That would be the other thing. I'm not going to artificially funnel things. I'm just going to do what I think is the best move for my character and the party in the moment. I also don't want someone else doing it for me, saying, I'm going to push my finger on the scale because I think this is the best story. I cannot even express how much I dislike that. I've played in some pretty bad games or just had frustrating experiences with fellow players because of that very thing. When I've noticed players wanting to do things like create obstacles, create tension, and do things on their own because they thought it would be more cooler, more fun. It drives me bananas. I do not like that. Capital D, capital N. I do not want that at my game. Do what's best for your character in the moment. I just want to be like I'm playing make-believe when I was a kid or even as an adult with my friends and my daughter and say, hey, what if this is going on? What if Spider-Man fought the Hulk? Who would win? That's really what I want. That's at the core of what I want out of a role-playing experience. Put myself in somebody's shoes, and then all I'm really worrying about, again, other than not being a jerk kind of principles, is what would they do in a certain situation? I believe that stories will grow from that, whether we want to call them emergent stories, organic stories, whatever. Afterwards, you can go back and find the story that runs through it. I don't need to have that story made for me by myself or for somebody else. Of course, you have adventure modules and all that stuff. And so, yes, there is some gray area, wiggle room, whatnot when you're playing through a particular scenario. I get that. But I don't need myself or other players then inserting more of this kind of framing to create story. The stories to me will come. I don't need to help it along. I don't need you, if you're a player at the table, I don't need you to help it along either. There's enough things going on, whether it's a module, whether it's the GM, that's all I need. So when I talk about story, or at least when I look at what I don't like about story, it's that presupposing what is the cool story and trying to imprint that on the game. I want the organic story. I want the story that comes afterwards. Give me all that messy history in the game. Give me story afterwards. Sure, if it's a one-shot, then that's going to change things a little bit, because if you're playing too messy, which I'm not really advocating, I'm not advocating for making trouble. I'm not advocating for going off the reservation, so to speak. I'm just saying that whatever the scenario is, just play to do the best thing for your character, given the constraints as you can, and then I think story will come. It doesn't need to be pushed onto the game. I don't need story agendas. And I think that's what I dislike about some of the framing of story games like Grimwild. And I'm not even really I'm not anti-story game. I don't have much experience with them. I would love to play them. I think oftentimes in practice, these games probably don't have this kind of hard steerage. I just don't like that language being in the game, because I think, just like we talk about how, hey, it gives players and GMs permission to do things when they see them written in the rules, I don't like the idea of giving players permission to try to steer things to what they think is cool. Because oftentimes what they think is cool is not what I think is cool. And now they're steering it in some direction, and it's frustrating to me. Whereas I think if they would just be, natural, they were just trying to get in the role and inhabit it a little bit and let go of that, then we'd all have a good time and we'd all tell an amazing story. That's my point of view. Let me know what you think. That's all I've got for now, everybody. Game on, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.